What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Casual Spikes podcast, episode 28, the first episode of the new year. And what a better way to kick it off than starting with one of the biggest tournaments to start the year, the essential return of GPs, the Spotlight Series that is going to be taking place in Atlanta, Georgia at SCGCon Atlanta. We're going to be talking about the metagame. We're basically going to be going over what to expect, what you're going to be watching, exactly what you're looking for in terms of watching these decks kind of operate, and then of course ending off with some predictions for the event. But of course, before we get into any of the information regarding the Spotlight Series in Atlanta at SCGCon Atlanta, if you're not already subscribed to this channel and you want to see more episodes of the Casual Spikes podcast, easiest way to do it is hit that big red subscribe button down below, and you will be notified when new episodes go up. We try to post one episode a week, and if you decide I cannot get enough of these guys, they're handsome, beautiful, and they definitely know about Wizard Squares, then you can follow us at our own individual channels, mine being Friday23, link down in the description below, where I talk a lot about the current competitive formats as well as going over Pioneer, Standard, Modern, whatever the case may be, fun videos. So if you want some of that stuff, go ahead and check out my channel down below. Same thing with Randy. He covers usually covers the competitive season, does his own metagame breakdown and everything. Really awesome. Go check out his channel, link down in the description below. We do greatly appreciate any and all support. And before I go on talking even longer, Randy, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. The channel is called Magic with Randy because I know you struggled because I think you were going to say Modern Randy, which is what I used to be called. And then somebody kindly pointed out that I do more than just Modern, which when I started my channel like almost 2 years ago now, there was no RCQ season. There was no anything. So like I was like, I'm just going to cover Modern. That's the only fun format. Standard doesn't matter because it's Arena and Pioneer's dead. And now, 2 years later, we care about Standard. It's not only on Arena. Modern's still a format. Pioneer's dead. And, we're just jiving along.
Well,
Pioneer's not dead. Wizards just declared it dead by not giving it any RCQs this entire year.
I just want you to know that I still have it set as Modern with Randy. So I now change your nameplate to MTG with Randy. So
thank you. But yeah, it's not a big deal. I just changed it because it better fit what I was doing or what I'm doing, because I do just cover whatever the RCQ season is essentially, as well as I'll cover the RCs and stuff of that nature. So like right now my channel is kind of weird because I'm going over like metagame breakdowns of what's happening in Standard the past weekend, and then also like doing deck techs and things about what decks to play in Modern, because we have the RCs coming up in February and March. Then we have the European RC coming up here in January, which I'm super excited for because it'll give us our first real taste of Modern in paper, which is always different than what's on Moto, because I think a lot of people are super ingrained on Moto to where like this deck is what I played, this deck does well, I'm going to keep playing it in challenges until something I'm given new data. And that's definitely not what happens with paper. People take the best deck they think is going to be, or they take what's in their budget as well, because it's not just millionaires going to play in RCs. Average Joes like me who pretends not to be in crippling debt go to these and play as well. So you're definitely just playing, what cards can you play with, what cards do you have, and still trying to make the best deck. So, your paper metas always come out a little bit different, so I'm kind of curious to see what happens there.
oh yeah, Modern, really right now, I think competitive Magic is poised to take a giant leap in 2025. Of course,
Yes.
with the episode we're talking today, Spotlight Series, brand new. We're going to get 5 in total in the United States and then 3 overseas, which I think 2 of them being in Europe, 1 being in
Japan.
Japan. Yeah, I think specifically Japan.
Yeah, it's specifically Japan because they recognize they have a large enough Asian market that they have to give them one. Basically, we gotta give them one specifically, otherwise they're gonna hate us.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we have even with just month 2, Spotlight Series going on this weekend. We have the Innistrad Remastered set, which we should be getting spoilers for very, very soon, going into Aether Drift for next month and everything. Just there's a lot going on in the early parts of Magic. We have MTG Chicago, whatever it's called, whatever they call the Pro Tour, basically, in Chicago, Magic Fest still.
Yeah, Magic Fest.
Still Magic
So
Fest.
I was like, what is that called? That's coming up soon, but I don't know when that's coming up.
It would be a good thing to know. Randy, fact check it. But, what exactly is the Spotlight Series? If you did not see the previous episode, which you should go and check out, maybe after this one, I would greatly appreciate it if you did that after this one. But we talked about the Spotlight Series and exactly what the players are playing for. We did kind of a full breakdown of what exactly players are getting. One of the big things for the Spotlight Series is kind of being reminiscent of Grand Prix back in the day, or Magic Fest after Grand Prix. Essentially, this is a way for players to qualify for the Pro Tour. The top 8 players of the event do qualify for the Pro Tour. There is a pretty large cash amount that is being handed out, I believe, down to at least the top 64. I think it might even go down to the top 128 players of the event. Sweet promos that are going to be given out. The top 128 players receive a foil Terror of the Twin Peaks, which is Terror of the Twin Peaks, which has a really cool art. I believe is Dan Frazier was the person that we...
Yeah, because he's going to be at the event too.
Yep.
Quick side note, they're paying down to top 64, but top 128 get the promo. So you get paid out to the top 128, but cash is only to the top 64.
Okay, so I was kind of right, and I definitely should probably trust the old noggin a little bit more than I do. But top 64 make money, or get paid out some sort of cash. 128 get a foil promo. Just showing up, you sign up for the event, play in the event, whatever. You do get a regular promo of the Terror of the Twin Peaks. Top 8 does get an invite to the Pro Tour, and first place gets something very interesting, which is something that I don't know if they've necessarily done before. But definitely, at least since I've been playing Magic for the last 10, 11 years, they haven't done it. Whoever wins, at least specifically the Atlanta Spotlight event, gets a case, not a box, a case of every standard legal Magic set that is going to be released in 2025. Which I think right now, I think we said it before, it's 5 or 6 standard sets, 6 that are going to get released. That's 36 boxes of Magic product. You're going to be getting Aether Drift, some of the Universes Beyond stuff, the new Tarkir set that we're going to be getting. So definitely a pretty huge incentive to not only make the top 8 of the event to qualify for the Pro Tour, which is ultimately what a lot of players are kind of striving for when they go to these kind of events, but also getting a pretty unique prize in, a case of every standard legal set for 2025.
So in other words, too, if you make the top 8, the ultimate goal essentially, right? The ultimate goal is obviously get first place, but if you're realistically setting your expectations, you're trying to top 8, which is also still a big achievement to do. The Pro Tour you're qualified for is that Pro Tour Chicago. It's MagicCon now. That's what they call it, not Magic Fest. They got rid of the Magic Fest now, and MagicCons. Same difference, doesn't matter. It's a name. But that is in February 21st. That's February 21st of this year. So you have roughly
6-7
2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost 2 months to prepare for it. The good news is that so the RC in Portland is February 7th and 9th, and that is when the Aether Drift comes out. So you have until from that date until the 21st to practice your limited, and hopefully you've learned it well enough to go against pro players.
Hey, imagine if winning the Spotlight Series and you get a full case of it, you can get 7 other people. You guys can draft quite a bit to prepare for that. Something too that kind of came to mind that we talked about before. There is no Worlds invites that are given out at these Spotlight events. It's only for the Pro Tour. Kind of the reason to play in these Spotlight events as well is just the fact that it is going to be, on average, a higher level of competition. Whether you're already at that level and you're I can probably play and win in this tournament, or at least do very, very well, make a little bit of money maybe on my weekend. But for a lot of players, maybe more of me and Randy, where it's just kind of figuring out, okay, where are you at? Where's kind of the skill difference? Maybe what are you missing? Those sort of things where you can kind of learn along the way while also, having the potential of just doing very well at a tournament like that. And it can definitely be a major confidence booster. In general, end up making you a better player. So there is a lot of incentive, whether you're maybe not a super strong competitive player or you are a really strong competitive player, to go to these tournaments if possible and just kind of see where you stack up in terms of, the higher level competition that's out there.
Mhm. I will also say if you're not in that position where you think you're ready, or you have, the financial, you don't have the financial needs to go to it, because obviously, I mean, like I was trying to go to it, and I was just like, it's not financially smart of me to go down there and do that this weekend, so that's why I'm not there, like I would want to be. I implore you to then go watch the coverage that's going to be happening. It starts at like 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. Figure it out from there if you're anywhere other than Eastern Standard Time. Google is your friend, but you should definitely watch it. Watch how the top tables are going. I will say probably like if you really want to start watching, I would say like round 3, round 4 is when you're going to start seeing people start rising to the top. Because obviously, like round 1, you can be at table 1. It doesn't mean like you're the best player in the room. It just means that's how the seating chart worked out. Same thing like round 2, round 3 is where you start to see it kind of go, and round 4 is where you start solidifying. Okay, now the good players are moving up to the top tables. You're going to see good players versus good players at this point. Not to diminish anyone who's like at table 1 on round 1, but this is how pairings go. But I implore you to watch, see what the players are doing, especially if you're already playing, like, you're playing Dimir, you're playing Golgari, you're playing one of the red aggro decks. Watch the people who are playing your deck, see how they do, what they're doing, what kind of lines they're taking. I think Corey Ballmeister is going to be one of the people commentating this weekend. I know he's pretty good at, like, what I call, like, simplifying Magic. He breaks it down to an almost ridiculous kindergarten level, I would call it, and like I don't mean that in a bad way. Like there's definitely people who are watching this thing who don't have a very competitive grasp. Like I'm sure like you and me watching coverage can be like, oh okay, I know why he went A B C and did these plays, as sort of like someone who's just starting out in Magic or doesn't have a strong competitive like background, or is gonna go, I don't know why he did A B C, why didn't he go A D C? And like he does a really well job of breaking it down to like kindergartner level, basically, like this is why you do these steps in this order, and it's definitely something you're going to at least gain knowledge from, if nothing else. Like if you can't play in it or you can't be there, that's the next best step, is to watch it. And if you are going down to this tournament and you go 0-3 drop, unfortunately, because statistically someone's going to go 0-3 drop in this tournament, I implore you to either do side events. If you're not going to do that, sit there and watch the top tables, watch people play. It will only give you an advantage. Like you're not going to get anything less from it by watching someone quote unquote better than you play Magic and see what kind of lines they're taking.
Oh yeah. Just as like a quick aside from it, the commentators for the event are supposed to be. I'm assuming Ailey and Corey are going to be, teaming up in the booth. They're usually like the commentating duo for a lot of the Pro Tour stuff. They were the commentating duo for the other half of commentating duo for the regional championship in Washington D.C. Could probably surmise that they're both going to be there. They're both awesome. And then we have Maria Bartholdi, and then Devuti. I can't remember his first name. Mani, I think it's like Mani Devuti.
I'm not 100% sure. I don't keep up too well with the commentators. I know that for some reason, whenever I watch the Pro Tour, no matter what time frame I click into it, it's always Corey who is one of the people commentating. And I don't know how I do it, because like I can sit there and watch the whole thing, but sometimes every time I look up or look at it, it's always Corey talking, and I don't know how I've managed to do that. So I just know that how he commentates, essentially, for sure. But yeah, him and his partner are almost always together. So like she's also very good at like breaking down complex situations and breaking down situations to, like I said, like basically like a kindergartner level, which is not to diminish them by any means. Like sometimes it's annoying in my opinion, but that's coming from my own background of I've been playing competitive Magic for 6-7 years now. I have what I think is a good understanding of why people are doing the lines they're doing type situation. Even then I'll still find where like, oh no, why didn't he do ABC, and they'll break it down. Oh okay, I'm just dumb, I didn't think about X, Y, and Z. That's on me. Like so I still find myself learning things and not noticing things, because it is just how it happens. Like Magic is a very mental and complex game that you need to be thinking about a lot of different things, and especially with not like being in that person's seat, it's hard to think of every line that you would be thinking of in that seat.
Oh yeah, and I think something I definitely would take for granted is when you're in that position where you have all the information and stuff. It's at least very easy for me to like sit here and yell at my TV. It's like, do this, and obviously the players don't have all the information and like the commentators too, very well. They bring a lot of energy to the table. They're also able to break down the information, like you were saying, just like break it down to a very basic level, and then also like kind of give you the idea of like what this person is thinking, given the information that they have versus just, we all have perfect information. We know that, if they go for it, they're going to get blown out or they're going to win the game. But kind of thinking like, what are, from a competitive standpoint, what should I be thinking in this spot to essentially avoid losing a game that I should win or trying to win a game that I'm pretty far behind in. So definitely worth watching coverage. I think SCG puts on a great show, period. I think that, the two people, the two groups that they have in the commentary booth are going to do a fantastic job. Obviously, I personally wish that Patrick Sullivan and Cedric Phillips were doing coverage, but, I think that's just one of the best duos of all time. But, they're definitely in pretty good hands coming into this event.
Oh, yeah. I don't think, like, I will say, like, those like, the problem is like we're comparing, the people they have now to what I would consider probably the best duo we've had in Magic for Magic coverage probably ever.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's very hard to sit there and go, well, they're not as good as them. Like, yeah, but like it's the same way as like you compare any quarterback to Brady. Like when you compare it to the best, it's always going to look worse. That's just how it is. But they are still very, very capable casters and very capable at what they're doing and do a wonderful job. They're not lacking by any means. We're just comparing them to what we consider the two best casters.
Yeah. Just someone who's like iconic, or like two people that are like iconic for me, and like how many Saturdays and Sundays I've wasted like watching Magic coverage and just being like, I'm gonna go to the shop and hang out, and then I'm playing it on Twitch and everything. So to me, like that's maybe partly nostalgia, but everybody's in great hands. But that's in a long-winded term, I guess. That's kind of what's on the line. That's what to expect from the non-games played on the table. For what is actually going to be going on the table, I think me and Randy have kind of narrowed it down to a select handful of decks that you need to absolutely be aware of, when you are watching the games, and kind of having a good understanding of what is going on, so you're not necessarily lost following, or can at least kind of get in the mindset of like, oh yeah, I don't want to think about the deck in this way, I want to think about it that way, and then kind of help you break down some of the situations in real time before it's kind of I would say spoiled to you, either by the commentators or by the players if they're able to make those decisions fast enough. So Randy, we kind of talked about it before in the pre-show, the warm-up if you will. Dimir midrange over the last 30 days, and I go over the last 30 days because if you look at 7 days, 14 days, the metagame is a little bit closer with some of the decks that we're going to talk about, but over the last 30 days, Dimir midrange is the only deck that has a double-digit metagame share, sitting at about 20%, where Golgari and some of the other decks, like even some of the other aggro decks, I think have kind of taken a step back in terms of like their overall metagame share, with a few other decks coming up, which Jeskai Convoke, which we talked about a while ago on the podcast, I think is being kind of like a dark horse of the format, and it seems like more people are starting to pick it up. I think it's doubled from like 3.5% to like 6-7% of the metagame. And has kind of proven that like the reasons why we thought it was going to be good in the metagame is exactly why more people are playing it. And this Esper Bounce deck, which over the last, I would say 2-3 weeks has been kind of refined and has slowly kind of crept up in metagame share, and seems to be a deck that could potentially rival the Dimir midrange deck coming into this event, which I think is, I think what we can all agree with, at least with the data that we have given and how the deck actually plays, that it's going to be the deck to be in the standard format until we get Aether Drift coming in February.
I think the only problem I have with like Goldfish is they break down a lot of like the run aggressive decks, I think, too much. Like there's a Gruul Prowess and a Gruul Aggro deck, which are basically the same decks. I think there may be 1 or 2 card difference, and it's not like it matters enough to where like it's still the same core of like I plan to play the Mice package and Screaming Nemesis and the good cards. still. So if you do combine like Gruul Aggro and Gruul Prowess, they do technically go over the double digits because it's like 3.7 and 8.8%. So they're like 12% for double digits, which is what it should be just combined. But okay, get that argument. I do think it's crazy that when you look at the last 30 days breakdown, Esper midrange or Esper Bounce has a like 5% metagame share, and that deck has only been around for about 2 weeks. So it's put up enough like 5-0s and challenge like top 32 challenges to get 5% of the meta compared to the last 30 days, and it's only been around for maybe 2 weeks, which is just wild that like it's done that much and that well in this short amount of time. I do think it is the breakout deck of the weekend, or it's going to be like one of the most played decks of the weekend. I don't think it will be close, just because it's gained so much traction so fast. I think it's now made Stormchaser's Talent even more expensive than it already was. That card was pushing like $10. I think we're up to almost 12 to 15 now, just based off of this, because we had the blue-green tempo deck, we had the Bant tempo deck, we had the Saltire Bug tempo deck, we had the 4-color tempo deck, and now we have Esper tempo. I refuse to call it self-bounce. That is just my aggressive towards it, because I think that it's more of the tempo style deck still. Like it is doing a lot of like self-bouncing and stuff, but it is just tempo bounce.
The thing that going over Stormchaser's Talent did remind me of the Temur Otters deck, which I think I don't really see a whole lot of it in the metagame, but I can almost say with some assurance that there's going to be some amount of people playing that deck, and it's probably going to look fantastic because it's going to be the people that have been absolutely grinding it out with that deck and just figuring it out with a slightly changing metagame.
So that deck does have like it has a very big cult following, essentially. So I think it all depends on how well the red aggressive decks do. Because that's like the deck's biggest weakness is the red aggressive decks, and it's why we saw the Sultai Bug or like the Bant tempo decks go do so well, because it got to play the same way as that deck played, but it got to be a little bit more aggressive. It got to be faster. It got to have better answers to the red aggressive decks. Like the biggest problem with the rug deck or the teamer deck, whatever you want to call it, is that it has red base removal. Red base removal is really trash against Screaming Nemesis. And so when you get to be, Bant or Sultai, and you get to go, oh, I'm just going to take out my Shelter by Ghost and hit you for 6 and gain 6 life. Or, oh, I'm going to, just nowhere it, give it -3/-3. It doesn't matter anymore. I took no damage. Nothing happened. And I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to bounce this back and bounce back your mouse that has tokens on it too. So that when you replay your mouse, it's going to die next turn, just so you know. Like, you get to do all these fun interactions that the Flood Color deck doesn't get to do. And I think that's why the Flood Color deck has been so, down and out, essentially. So, like, if we see a metagame where these red aggressive decks start to, like, fall off more and more, that deck's going to spiral out of control, because it's really good against the mid-range decks. They can't really keep up with it, and you can just kill someone out of nowhere on one turn. Like, it's very easy to just set up like, oh, I'm gonna play this tempo or like this combo card, but I'm gonna play this combo card, and then you're dead. Yeah, but I was at 27. Yeah, you're dead. I attacked you with 7/7 mice or rats. I'm sorry, they're rats technically.
Rats,
like
some of them otters.
Yeah. You just get to kill people out of nowhere with that deck, but it does horrible against the red aggressive decks, and that's why I got off that deck, essentially, was because I was just my red matchups I could make at best was 50%. And if that's going to be all the meta, I don't want to be a 50% at the most popular decks in the format. That just sounds awful.
Yeah, I think a lot of what the Flood Collar, like the Rug Flood Collar decks had going for them is that one half of their combo, like, yeah, it gets eaten by the removal spells, and like short of something like the Anoint with Affliction, you were going to kill their thing, and they were still going to get the benefit of their creatures being able to tap for any color of mana. And then their other part of their combo piece to kind of get the engine going, or at least, where the real power of the deck kind of lies in it, is that Valley Flood Caller, which you can just play at instant speed, and then also, if you're not playing on necessarily turn 3, but you're playing it on like turn 6 or turn 7, well, now I have a bunch of mana up to where now I can kind of start playing my spells at instant speed, and I can just essentially build out a huge board to where it's like, okay, well, now I can just play another Flood Caller and then play a few spells, attack, kill you, rather than the full-blown play this, okay, now I'm going to cast a bunch of spells, then kill you. You know, you can basically beat them through their interaction.
Yeah, and not to mention, like, with it playing this town ain't big enough, like, there's so many times where you can just go, like, okay, I'm going to, like, I cast this, like, say it resolves in a turn, you untap, or even you just cast it this turn. You're like, okay, I'm going to tap my, my Otter, and whatever, make mana. I'm going to go to cast a Sorcery Seed spell. Well, I'm going to respond by killing it. All right, well, in response, I'm going to cast this town ain't big enough. Get my untap trigger. With that's still on the stack, I'm going to tap those for mana again, cast a couple more instant spells. Like, that's cool. In the end, you're going to end up bouncing your Flood Caller, probably another spell, probably another permanent on your side, or, like, their one blocker. And, like, all right, cool, I'm going to attack you for 10, or, like, 15. I still have Flood Caller in my hand. I still have all this value. I'm glad you played your removal spell, though. That was good. The removal spell was good. It almost got me.
Yeah, just, there's so, and real quick, too, before we, like, kind of explain kind of what these decks have going on, because I guess we kind of already know for the Flood Caller deck, even though I didn't mean for it to get that far. It just was something that reminded me, because it was a deck that was a pretty, I would say, an important part of the metagame. I think it was a deck that people were playing in some number. I also think it was a deck that, you really needed to understand what was going on to be able to unlock the full benefit and the potential of it. Rather than just saying, I'm going to go pick it up and play it, and I'm going to grind the ladder out because it's such a good deck. It's like, you'd be correct, but you need to know what's going on.
Yeah, it's definitely a deck that you need to know the ins and outs of, and, like, when to push your edge, or just go, like, either way, I need to do this turn, or I'm going to be losing because I'm not getting enough traction.
Mm-hmm. And the thing I wanted to touch on, at least with, like, the Flood Caller deck, is the fact that, like, this town ain't big enough. Has been a surprisingly very impactful card, and, like, the creative ways that people use to kind of leverage it, because the Esper Self bounce deck, I think, benefits a lot from this town ain't big enough, just being able to bounce two things, and the fact that it essentially costs 2 mana to then bounce 2 of your things, and how much value you end up generating from that. And of course the synergies with Up the Beanstalk, and just being able to protect, like, a key piece of, like, your board, while also getting rid of something of your opponents, and being able to do it for 2 mana at instant speed, no less. It's just a card that I think like, really, really good players, and really players that are ingrained with Standard, probably saw this card and was just like, how do we kind of, how do we make this busted? And then for someone like me, who's very smooth brained, is just like, I'm amazed every time I play the card. I'm just amazed with, like, how good it is, and how much blowout potential is actually there, that it creates. And again, like, all the value that it ends up generating in a lot of these other, like, tier 1 to tier 2 strategies.
I will say this town ain't big enough is definitely a card that flew completely over my radar. I'm also not, like, I'm not the biggest person into Standard. Or I'm still not, and I'm playing the RCQs and stuff, like, as it is now. But, like, just the fact of, like, how much is, like, the Flood Caller that came out, and, like, this town ain't big enough, then exploded because of that. Like, I think that the Flood Caller deck was, like, maybe the best version of it, and then because of how the meta game is, though, it spawned all the tempo versions we saw of blue, green, Bant, 4-color, bug, Sultai, if you want to call it that, just exploded out and do well. And then we've now gone to, like, the Esper tempo after self bounce deck that is also just doing well with it. And I it's literally, that card is a linchpin in, like, all those decks. Like, if this town ain't big enough got banned today, like, all these decks die. Like, you can still play them, but it becomes increasingly harder, because, like, with the tempo decks, it lets you rebounce your Eddy Merc Crab. Is, like, the best thing you can do. Like, being able to, like, attack with your Eddy Merc Crab, bounce one of their attackers, tap down the other 2 attackers. Like, you just get to chain all this value, and if you have a Beanstalk out, you just go insane, because you're drawing 2 extra cards while also doing this. And, like, that's, like, the best thing you can do with it. But you can do other BS with it by bouncing your own permanents and stuff like that. It's just so much value that it creates, and it's so unreal, because it is this innocuous uncommon that looks like a limited bomb. Like, it's one of those cards, like, oh, this is really good at limited, and then you stop caring about it because your draft is over. You have to go play competitive.
Yeah, a lot of shoot, how do I want to put this? Like a lot of the other bounce spells and things like this that are in standard that people are really playing. You know, you have Into the Floodmaw, but it can only target your opponent's things, and then you have to also give them a fish if you want to bounce something that's not a creature. You have just straight up Unsummon, which is just actually bouncing a creature. Just like some of those that are like really efficient, that really get the job done, and really what made like the Sultai like Terror deck very popular, and then some of the other variants of that deck very popular. Obviously, like This Town Ain't Big Enough fulfills two roles, where it just is an answer to any permanent or non-land permanent that you or your opponent could play, and you can essentially use it as protection, and then like very late in the game you just like at the end of your opponent's turn bounce two things, still potentially just get to draw cards of something like Up the Beanstalk, and then just kind of keep things moving from there. So it's just a very versatile card that is currently doing something where if you want to do it cheaper, you only get to bounce one thing and you have to give your opponent a permanent, or you just don't have the option at all.
Yeah.
But we can get into the standard metagame. I think it's going to be super important to at least look at Dimir midrange, and of course talk about Golgari midrange kind of in that same sentence. Definitely Golgari midrange, I think, is a deck that has kind of fallen off a bit. It was kind of neck and neck with the Dimir midrange decks for quite a bit, and then we've definitely just seen the shift to people wanting to play, blue-black over green-black, but we're just going to put them here because they're essentially going to be married to each other until who knows when, honestly. Probably when rotation happens next.
When does Fairy Mastermind rotate out? That's when. When Fairy Mastermind rotates out, and Shieldred rotates out, and Kaido rotates out, that's when this deck will stop being a thing.
All right, so we got quite a bit of time. Kaido is just an absolute beating. But I'll kind of kick us off with the Dimir midrange deck, because I know you like some rock over there.
Yeah.
But the Dimir midrange deck, and like one of the main reasons to play like the really any of the black based midrange decks is the removal options you get and the type of pressure this deck kind of puts on. So like as you'll probably hear from Randy, both of these decks play great, obviously, in the mid game. I think Dimir midrange is a little bit better when it comes to the late game because of the card Enduring Curiosity. While you're able to play a lot of these flash threats or just leave up mana, don't even shake your head over that, Randy.
Enduring Curiosity is just a dumb card. The fact that it says you draw a card for each creature that deals combat damage to a player is just broken, right? Because you're already playing all these like little like low drop flying creatures. Like, oh, I did 3 damage to you, but I also drew 3 cards and such a recall. Yay!
Yeah, and that's where we've talked about before when kind of talking about these decks and kind of comparing them, and the reason why I like the Dimir deck so much, even way back then, and the reason why to play the deck. When you play a lot of these mid-range strategies, like yes, you do get a lot of value out of your cards. You can usually get like 2-for-1s or 1-for-1s that are super in your favor, but eventually you run out of cards, and depending on how things go, you just don't end up having enough resources to kind of deal with what your opponent is kind of sending at you, or maybe your cards don't necessarily line up. At least with the Dimir decks, you are able to play a card like Enduring Curiosity. A lot of them too, I've seen playing, I think, 1 to 2 copies of Gix as well, in kind of the same vein where you're going to get to play these small creatures, on turn 1, 2, and 3. A lot of them being just 2 mana flash threats, so you're able to like play a Fairy Mastermind and then play a cut down. So you're able to kind of gain some more tempo that way. And then you play your Enduring Curiosity or your Gix, whatever the case may be. You hit your opponent with like 2, 3, 4 creatures. You draw that many cards. All of a sudden you're sitting with 7 cards in hand versus your opponent's 3. And over the course of multiple turns, you're just going to look at so many more cards and have so many more resources than what your opponent has that, again, we talked about mid-range decks just being very good, like the best bang for your buck. Well, now you have an overwhelming amount of resources to where your opponent is just slowly running out every turn, and it makes it a lot easier to kind of grind out those games when you're passing the turn with 7 cards in hand every time, and essentially having the perfect 7, always hitting your land drops, and having the ability to double, triple, quadruple spell while your opponent is struggling to probably play 2 spells a turn.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue with that. I will say too, the biggest thing I will argue for Dimir mid range, or if you're playing against Dimir, is you need to stop them from doing a turn 3 Kaido. That is their biggest way to get advantage, because Kaido starts that whole train of card advantage. His -2 ability lets him lock down a creature. It's just a really good card, and so if you can make them have to play Kaido either on like turn 4 by hard casting it, or delay it to where they have to take extra couple turns, you're gonna end up winning a lot of those games by making them delay it. Now, obviously, too, if you can stop like Enduring Curiosity is another big one to stop, but like that's a lot harder to stop as to where as to where Kaido you can actually stop, because it is just like they have to have an unblocked creature to get them out on turn 3, and like it's very obvious. Like obviously when they go like turn 1, 1-drop, turn 2, 2 more 1-drops, you're probably not stopping a Kaido on 3 when they have 3 1-drops they're attacking with. That's just the breaks. I'm sorry, that happens. They roll better than you on their hands, but like outside of that, though, like if you can slow them off of Kaido, and if you can stop Enduring Curiosity, or find a way to like diminish their value if they're getting from it, or put them in a position where they can't afford to attack to get the extra value, then obviously Enduring Curiosity doesn't matter if you're not drawing 2-3 extra cards a turn. That's like the biggest way to stop this deck. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done. They play a bunch of efficient removal. They play a bunch of like cheap efficient creatures. So their deck is built to do this. But there is ways to stop them. There is ways to do that, and they don't always have Kaido on 3. It just always feels like they have Kaido on 3. And I will say, if you're playing like depending on what deck you're playing, you usually want to prepare at least assume they have Kaido on 3, unless obviously they're attacking on turn 3 with 2 lands. They're not going to have Kaido then, But outside of that, just assume they have Kaido on 3 every time, and you need to play around it or figure out, like, okay, so when they Kaido on 3, what's going to happen? What am I going to do?
Yeah, and you kind of are benefited in a way, because like the Dimir deck is not going to close out the game super fast, unless you're on a draw that like you have a ton of pain lands and you deal a healthy amount of damage to yourself. This deck is not going to beat you necessarily in 1 to 2 turns, like out of nowhere. It's definitely going to be a kind of a slow burn over the course of the game. You're going to take 1 to 2 damage here or there, so you got to try to manage the evasive threats, because then like Kaido just kind of snowballs, that being one of the key cards of the deck. Of course, the other one being Enduring Curiosity. It's just, again, like if you let this deck get out ahead of you in that way, you're sitting there with like 2-3 cards in hand, and they're going up to like 8-9 cards, and you're at 8 life. There's a very good chance they're going to be able to put, more power into play. They're going to be able to tap down your things. They're going to be able to counter your things, whatever the case may be. Just get them out of the way and then close out the game from there. So really, as long as you don't let them snowball, they end up being pretty manageable. I would say if they had to play like a straight up mid-range deck, I would say Golgari is better, but it's the fact that Dimir has the tools to break out of like the mid-range trap of just like, I hope my draw lines up. I hope that I'm able to then stick something, make it very hard for my opponent to be aggressive while being able to kind of retaliate to them. And Dimir just says, "Hey, look at this! Like I'm able to deal a little bit of damage and outcard advantage you, and to that point, just absolutely grind you into the dirt."
Yeah, I mean, Dimir is definitely a death by 1,000 cuts. Like, you're not ever losing these matchups because they did 12 damage to you in 1 turn. And if they did, you were already losing that game. It doesn't matter. Like, if Dimir is attacking for 12 damage, the game is over. Like, you have lost this because they put, like, 17 creatures onto the field. Yeah. Like, you were already losing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, but no, yeah, Dimir is definitely a death of 1,000 cuts. They play a lot of, like, the 1-drops, or the 1/1s, the 2/1s, things like that they're just trying to get a lot of chip damage in and control the board until they can eventually just, attack for that last 3-4 damage and kill you. So it's a lot more of like managing the board or going wider or faster than them, essentially, which is not hard to go faster than in like pure like damage races, because like obviously the Gruul decks and the aggro decks can do that very easily, where they're attacking for they can attack for what 12 damage on by turn 3 or something stupid like that. They put a lot of power on the field very fast, but they play removal spells. They play things to make sure you're slowing down as well. That's their whole game plan. It's a slow, methodical burn of we're gonna just 1 damage here, 3 damage here, 1 damage here. Well, we're also getting to draw cards and doing BS advantage like that. So it is something you can beat. Obviously, it's not the best deck in the format. I think it's the best deck overall, like into an open meta, but it's not like the best deck as a whole. Otherwise, we was to see top 32 challenges being all Dimir, and that's not the case.
But definitely, at least to me, feels like probably one of the most consistent decks that you can play in standard right now.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most consistent decks. That being said, going into Golgari, unless you have more to say about Dimir?
No, I just, I stood on business. If you've seen episode 25 or 26, I had to do it to Randy. So
I will say that I think Golgari has gotten a lot better because they are starting to get away from the Annex package, the Chalice package, where the room. So they're going back to more of like, we're going to play 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, and we're just going to control the board through our creatures being a better value on average for the mana costs, as well as just playing efficient removal. So, we're playing Moshwood Dread Knight that has the Avenger to go draw a card, lose a life, and is also a 3/2 for 2 mana that when it dies, you can, recast it, essentially. We have Glissa Sunslayer, the best 3-drop probably in the game. There's nothing beats it in combat, basically. Or almost like there's 2 creatures that see play in standard right now that beat it in combat or like trade with it in combat, and one of them is Atraxa. Like,
and I think Glissa, we could probably argue, is probably like maybe top 3, just a top 3 creature.
Yeah, I think for what she does, for what her mana cost is, she's so efficient, being a 3-drop creature that is a 3/3, has First Strike, Death Touch, and then also when it gets to deal damage to a player, like you're either drawing a card, you're removing counters off of something, or you're destroying an enchantment. Yeah, or destroying an enchantment. Like, there's pound for pound that is a very good, efficient 3-mana card.
Atraxa also doesn't kill it either.
Atraxa has First Strike.
She has Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink.
She doesn't have First Strike? Oh my god. Okay, sorry. There's one card that sees play now, then.
It's
my
itself.
bad. No. So Glissa can trade with Glissa, and then the White Knight that gets first, that is a 2/2 First Striker, but if there's a black permanent on the field, gets a +1 and has Hexproof from black.
Knight of Grace, I think.
Yeah, Knight of Grace. So Knight of Grace is the only card that sees play that can trade with Glissa. My mistake. I thought Atraxa had First Strike. The card has like 30 keywords. I assumed First Strike was on there. And of course we're playing Shieldred, and then the newest thing, which is why I think Golgari is starting to gain more traction. People remember that Thrun, Breaker of Silence, is in the deck or in the format. So Thrun is a 5-mana 5/5 that can't be countered, has trample. As long as it's your turn, it has indestructible, and then it can't be a target of non-green spells your opponents control or abilities from non-green sources. So he stops Kaido from targeting him. He can't get hit by removal spells unless they're basically the fight card is the only green removal spell in standard right now. Bushwhack. So like unless you're fighting Thrun with another 5/5, he's not dying. Then of course like we're playing the same efficient removal that Dimir gets to play. We also get to play Maelstrom Pulse, which is good to hit any of the non-land permanents, which gives it a little bit of an edge against like the Caretaker's Talent deck, the Zur decks running around, all like the random decks, right? You get to deal with the enchantment stuff that Dimir doesn't get to deal with because it's blue and black. And it's set up to build. It's set up to do well in the mid game. And I think it has a good long game too as a whole. I think that Dimir has a better long game in the sense of the Enduring Curiosity. Because if you're just constantly drawing cards, like we don't have a way to essentially draw cards in this build right now because we're not playing the Chalice. We're not drawing a card at the end step and losing 2 life unless we have a demon type situation. But we still get to play all these efficient creatures. We still get to play like 6 to 8 man lands we're playing. We have ways to use our mana. We have ways to do it. The list I'm looking at is playing Gix Command. I know that's starting to come back into the meta because of Jeskai Convoke gaining more traction, and you need a way to remove remove or have a board wipe against those type of decks. So I do think this deck is poised to do well. I think it can actually do better against Dimir now that we're playing Thrun in the list, just because it does do well. And then our sideboard allows us to go even bigger with Nissa's, or to go into a more like detailed matchup, like whether we need to hit the graveyard, whether we need to be hitting their hand with to remove their spells, or like more removal. It just gives us all the options as well. So if we need to be like slicker and have more removal, we have that in the sideboard. If we need to hit graveyards, we have that in the sideboard. If we need to go bigger, we have Nissa. Like, we just get to do whatever we want to do.
Yeah, the Golgari deck for sure. I think the reason why I like some of the other decks in the metagame is for the fact that Dimir is definitely a deck that is not going to win very fast. It's going to play a lot slower of a game and just kind of like outcard advantage you over time. The Dimir deck definitely has card advantage to it, but I also think it just gets to play a lot of the better aggressive creatures in those colors. Like, you get to play creatures that are, very good on rate. The Glissa, just like I said, is probably at least a top 3 creature. Like, worst case, I think top 3 creature in standard. People have been wanting to play the 4-mana 6/6 demon, the Archfiend of the Dross.
Yeah.
And Archfiend just doesn't hold a candle to Glissa, because if Glissa gets to connect and Archfiend's in play, you lose the game.
Yeah. I will say the biggest problem I think that Golgari has is like the bounce decks, like the tempo versions, where like if you play that 6/6, it is very much a liability against like the tempo decks that can tap you out and stuff. I've now seen 2 different games, one of which I was a part of, where I killed my Golgari opponent because they removed the last counter on their demon.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still at not 0 life.
Yeah.
Like, that is a big thing, and I like the fact that them going into more of a Shieldred game plan, where like a lot of times when you're bouncing Shieldred, she still took 2-4 life off of that opponent just for bouncing it. And then, like, you're not like, it's not a liability if they just go tap your creatures, tap your creatures, tap your creatures, or anything crazy like that. Where like she just gets to gain you some life from just drawing a card naturally, or with like Glissa drawing a card, Preacher drawing a card, Mosswood drawing a card. You get to go up on life in those exchanges, or she's damaging your opponent, and she's just a win con by herself too. And against like Dimir, like, they have to remove her. Their whole game plan is to draw an bunch of extra cards. Great, man. You can draw. You draw those 4 cards. I'll take 4 damage. You draw those 4 cards. You take 8 damage. That's a great trade for me. I'll gladly have you take 8 damage. I'll take 4, and you get to draw your 4 cards.
I'm glad that you understand. It's still a good deal.
I mean, it is, except that you also have to deal with all my creatures still being able to attack you, and now we're playing Thrun that you can't deal with.
I'll pay 3 life per card.
He says as he dies with a grip of 7.
I don't even care. Like, you've never seen a person die with 7 cards in their hand and not be happy about it.
I have. I've been that person. But no, I do think that the on-rate creatures is good. Obviously, the deck does still struggle, not so much with like the aggro decks. I will say I think Dimir is worse overall against the red aggressive decks, and Golgari is better just because our creatures are essentially fatter. So even if you give them trample, like, we're still soaking up a lot of damage from that. Glissa just says you have to kill me if you want to attack. That just the fact that she says you have to kill me before you can attack is huge. And then we still get to play the same removal you do, and I think we get to play a little bit better removal, being able to play like Kick Command in the main deck, and like Maelstrom Pulse, where all right, they're gonna like try to build up a board. Cool, I'm gonna kill like, oh, you have like 2 of the same creature, now you have none of the same creature.
Yeah, Dimir, the creatures definitely do a good job of delaying the creatures, and then it's like the actual removal spells do a good job. So I will agree, like, Golgari, at least against the aggressive decks, definitely has more flexibility, where they're able to add to their board by playing a creature that is also going to be very good on defense. Where Dimir, you really don't want to be blocking with Fairy Mastermind. Flood Pitch Drowner is only going to like be a temporary solution to kind of what's going on, to maybe give you a turn to deal with it. In the worst case, Flood Pits gets shuffled back in, you get rid of their creature. So I will give I'll give Golgari that, where it definitely has an easier time, I think, handling the aggressive decks in that way with just the creatures as well.
But that's kind of my case of why I think Golgari is maybe the better choice in this particular event we have going on. I think the Golgari might be a better choice. Now, obviously, if you've been playing a bunch of Dimir, you own Dimir. I get why you're going to take Dimir. Like, I'm not saying like you're dumb for taking Dimir. It clearly does well. I think it's also a very well positioned deck. I don't think it's a bad choice by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah. But it definitely makes sense, though. I think why you're seeing Golgari come back a little bit into the metagame. Because, it was like neck and neck. For the longest time, it was neck and neck where like Dimir, Golgari, and like Dimir was always winning out, but it was like by 10 more decks were played this week instead of, and now if you look at like my last metagame breakdown, Golgari almost is non-existent. It dropped off so hard. It is making a comeback, like I said. People remember Thruns in the metagame and is good against the mirror type situation.
Yeah, they just got to get there.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about like I guess not the elephant in the room, but like the red prowess problem in the room?
The red prowess problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. We can talk about aggro if you want, I suppose.
Yeah, so we're gonna lump mono red aggro, Gruul, and the Boros decks all into one because they're all relatively the same. Anybody who's playing, a version of that and wants to yell at us in the comments because they're not all the same, that's fine. You can do that. So relatively, they're all playing essentially the same cards here in the sense that they're all playing Heartfire Hero as their 1-drop. They're usually all playing Hired Claw as the other 1-drop. They're all playing Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse, and Streaming Nemesis. Now, some of them play some of the other creatures that go along with that. Some of them don't. Some play more removal. Some don't. The biggest difference with like the Gruul aggressive decks or the green-red aggressive decks is that they are usually running Questing Druid in the main or sometimes in the sideboard as a way to get card advantage or get more cards going throughout the time playing. And usually they're running the Innkeeper's Talent as a new... I say new card in the deck. That's what originally started off at this. When you look back at Standard and when Innkeeper's Talent came out, that was what Gruul was playing. We went to where it doesn't play that, now to where full circle where it's playing Innkeeper's Talent again. Now, not all the Gruul decks are playing Innkeeper's Talent. Some are still on like Snakeskin Veil or some of the other protection spells as well. But that's like the overall census is they're all playing essentially those creatures. They're all playing the mouse package, which is Heartfire Hero, Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse. Those are like the 12 creatures. All of them are playing. Screaming Nemesis is the other one. If you're playing mono red, you're kind of more on the game plan of playing a little bit more burn because you're playing like the burst lightnings, you're playing shocks and lightning strikes, and you're usually playing the colorless land, the soul stone, whatever it is.
Yeah, Soulstone Sanctuary.
Yeah, Soulstone Sanctuary. Usually playing like I've seen it all the way up to 4 copies of that being play in the mono red version, and then in the Boros version, on average, they're still playing the mice package, and they're playing they'll play a little bit more burn as well because they'll play Boros Charm which is a protection spell and a burn spell, and then they also sometimes play some protection spells with the Shard Mage. Yeah. Can't think what the full name of the Shard Mage, where it gives it hexproof and +1/+1. They also get to play a little bit of a better game plan, in my opinion, against the other red aggressive decks because they get to play Shelter by Ghosts either in the main deck or the sideboard. So you get to now answer your red aggressive opponent's plan and also gain life at the same time. Super good in the mirror matches. They also get to play Lightning Calyx, which is another good card for the mirror match. Deal 3 damage, gain 3 life. You usually get to remove a creature, gain your life back. Good trade overall. But that's like the big differences. There is... I know there is a Boros aggro deck that is not running the mouse package as a whole. They're more on like a burn plan with like Slingshot Show Off as their card. This is very much a minority though, in my opinion. For what we see, I don't think it's necessarily the best. They play like Slickshot Show Off. They're playing like the 4 Shard Mages. They're really trying to protect Slow Off and just like kill you dead with Show Off by itself. Um, but that is technically one of the decks that is running around. It is a little bit different. That's not playing the mouse package. That being said, I still don't think that's necessarily the best game plan going forward with it.
Yeah, I think that's basically the two versions of like the red aggro decks that you need to kind of keep an eye out for. A lot of what you can expect is like what Randy was saying. The mouse package is like the way that you can just do, you can end up putting up like a ton of damage on your opponent, for essentially no effort for cards that you essentially want to play anyway. And then like Slickshot Show Off is like the only reason to maybe necessarily not play the mouse package, for the fact that with some combination of cards, you are able to just completely, do the same thing, like nuke your opponent's life total, in a way that's maybe a little less telegraphed. You just kind of like plot the Show Off, and then it can sit there until your opponent taps out, and then you're like, okay, like play this spell, double strike it, like boom, your opponent's dead. But definitely the more consistent package for the red decks is going to be the mouse package. That's the thing to kind of look out for, like Manifold Mouse on something like a Heartfire Hero. It's going to end up dealing a ton of damage, and then eventually when it dies, it's going to deal even more damage.
Yeah, Manifold Mouse can just take over the game with Heartfire, and even in the later games, it's good too. Like later in the game, it's good too. Like Manifold being able to trigger Emberheart for free. Get to see this not part of your library. Now, obviously, if it's a creature, you don't get to play that before combat, but you're still buying stuff off the top of your deck, which is good. And like they can do that without having to attack, right? Like they can just target. I'm going to target Emberheart Challenger, give it double strike, reveal a card. Okay, my attacks are still trash. Go to my second main phase, play the card off the top of my deck. Put another creature into play, and just continue to draw out the game until they can get into a favorable attacks, or they're dead. So the deck is super good. It's super resilient. Obviously, it's a large part of the meta share, I would say, as a whole. So it's something to look out for. If you haven't played any kind of standard and you're going to this tournament, I question your thought process, but wish you the best. But if you played any kind of standard, the mouse package, this deck. Even if you play Pioneer, the mouse package, because it's seeing playing Pioneer, that's how strong and powerful those cards are. So not too surprising to kind of see this. But I mean, that's basically like the red aggressive decks. And when we talk about like percentage or meta share, we're just going to group all three of those together. We know there are differences between them, but like realistically, they're all doing the same thing. They're trying to play some burn spells and some ice and kill you.
Yeah, you're getting a second color because it's in a way it's mostly free. Like the mana bases in standard right now are pretty good for supporting 2-color mana bases. So. And, there's a reason to play green, like Randy was saying, some of them opting for like Snakeskin Veil. You get the full value of playing, Seek the Beast / Questing Druid. You also get Innkeeper's Talent, things like that, and then of course Boros Charm is, an iconic burn spell that again doubles as protection. So you get a lot of cool things going into other colors. A lot of people have just opted to be straight mono red. Not even messing around with it. Like you just have a very solid, consistent mana base. So really that's kind of what you're looking at is kind of those different variants of the deck. If you're looking to play them, like it's probably just better to start with like the mouse package and, work backwards, I guess.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about what we think is one of the darker horses in the top 5? It's still going to be probably the top 5 played decks, but a darker horse.
Well, I think it's definitely going to be the deck that I guess you called out by name maybe it was, I don't know. I'm not going to play the blame game. I was going to, but then I realized I'm probably at fault and I don't want to be, I don't want to call myself out like that.
Well, I'm talking about your deck, so we'll see if you.
My deck?
Yeah.
I was saving that for last. Are you kidding me? I got so much.
Okay, I mean we can talk about the Esper self bounce then.
I think that's going to be the one that people are like the least familiar with, just for the fact that it is like as we were talking about before, it is a deck that is pretty brand new, I would say, to the metagame. I'd seen Doomwake maybe like a week or two ago playing some version of it, and then it's only evolved from there and has gotten better. So essentially what you need to know about this Esper self-bounce deck, it is a deck that kind of, is looking to play as many of these creatures like the Pixie that says that you pick up a non-fairy permanent, and if you return something to your hand that way, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it. You're getting to play cards like Nowhere to Run. You're playing the dumb like Nightmare. Hopeless Nightmare. You're getting to, of course, it's taking me forever to get there. So you get to play things like Nurturing Pixie, Fear of Isolation. You're getting to bounce things like Hopeless Nightmare, Storm Chaser's Talent, Nowhere to Run. Even, Defiled Crypt Cadaver Lab is like a card that you can kind of loop as well with these things, because your opponent kills your creatures, then you're able to replay the Cadaver Lab to go pick up that bounce creature, to then play the bounce creature to pick that up, and just kind of have this never-ending stream of like 1 mana 2/2s and 2 mana 2/3s on top of, again, just generating a ton of value, where you can just constantly play Nowhere to Run, give your opponent's creatures -3/-3. Very good way of killing Screaming Nemesis, and really good at getting rid of a lot of the creatures in like the Mirror and the creatures in like the Dimir decks and stuff like that. It's definitely a deck that is going to grind you out in a different way than the other mid-range decks, for the fact that you're going to get to play a lot of these flyers, kind of reminiscent of what the Dimir deck is doing. Cheap flyers, they're going to keep getting in for damage. They're going to keep adding to their board while also getting to kind of tempo you out with a lot of these really good enchantments, to where they're either going to run your hand completely out of cards, run your board completely out of creatures, or just, put a bunch of like 2-power flyers into play, and you're going to have to keep answering them, and they're just going to have the answer to bring them back to then kind of keep the loop going. So it's very annoying. We talked about how This Town Ain't Big Enough is a very good card, and this is like a deck that really just wants This Town Ain't Big Enough to kind of even supercharge the extra value that you get from replaying a lot of these enchantments.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we've seen now, Claudio just recently took first place with this deck in a standard challenge, and they're playing the Entity Tracker, which is two in a blue for 2/3 with flash, and has that eerie ability. So whenever an enchantment you control enters, or you unlock or whenever you fully unlock a room, you get to draw a card. So just being able to revalidate all your enchantments. Also, now you're drawing cards. You need that velocity to go through your deck, so you always have something going on with what you're doing. Bouncing your spells now also nets you card advantage. So just kind of a good thing to see. I do think this is going to probably be the most played deck, or the second most played deck in this tournament. This deck has gotten a lot of traction. Like we were saying, when you look at the last 30 days, it has 5% meta share, which is wild, considering that this deck was like unknown 3 weeks ago. Like, no one was really playing this deck 3 weeks ago. So, in a 2 weeks time, it has enough of a meta share to be within like the top 5, top 10 on the of the meta for 30 days. So I do think this is going to be probably one of the most played decks. I also think this deck is going to end up not having the best conversion rate as a whole, because the Spotlight Challenge is a 2-day event, right?
Yeah. They play Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, I think that day 2 we're going to see a lot less Esper. I think that this deck is good as a whole. I don't think it's bad. I think that it has a lot more suboptimal hands that you're going to have to keep. I think that when it mulligans hard, in the sense of like this deck needs all of its moving pieces to be in its hand. The mana is still not that great with this deck. With every time I see someone play it, they always complain about the mana going forward with it. It is a 3-color deck in Standard. You do have to play a bunch of pain lands in a format that has these aggressive decks in them. So like Mono Red is still like not the best deck in the sense of like you still get to play This Town Ain't Big Enough and Nowhere to Run as like your removal type spells. So like you do have answers to what they're doing, but like if you're dealing yourself 5 points of damage over the course of the game, and they get enough they can get enough chip damage in with 15 damage to like win that game. Like that's not unreasonable for Mono Red. while you're still having to deal with what they're doing and taking damage doing it. Um, so I do think that like this deck is not bad, but I do think it's going to have a lot worse conversion rate than what people think it's going to have moving forward, or at least with this tournament. I think the biggest edge it has is no one knows exactly what your list is going to look like. There's not a set 70, 75, or 60, which is the same thing Dimir has going for it, is there's no set 60 for Dimir, which I think is what always kind of gives it the edge. Is you have to play around kind of like 4 or 5 different cards at a time, and there may or may not be playing any number of those cards. As well as, they may or may not have them in their hand. So I do think that the deck has an edge from that standpoint, but I do think that the fact that it mulligans kind of terribly, in my opinion, it does just get to a point where it can just like kind of run out of things, or they kill the thing you're bouncing back. Now your cards don't really work well. So like if you had like mulligan to 6, you had like a Hopeless Nightmare in your hand to keep. They destroyed the Hopeless Nightmare. Now you don't really have anything you're bouncing back for value or doing anything like that. It then makes your hand a lot worse. Just things like that as a whole is the problem, quote unquote, with this deck, where like it is an issue. We'll see, going forward. I could be super wrong about this, but that is my kind of like hot take about the deck, is I think it is not a terrible deck. I think it can do well. I just think that we're going to see, for the amount of people that play it this weekend, it's going to have a terrible conversion rate based off of that.
I don't know. I don't know how to feel necessarily about this deck. I played it against it a few times, and I'm kind of with you, where at least with like the version that Claudio played, the fact that it has like now, or rather he played a creature that had like this built-in card advantage where it's getting to do its thing, and really it just doing the thing has been enough a lot of the times to just keep itself in the game and apply enough pressure. And I think when it kind of gets that card advantage now, it just kind of gets more options to where you're going to be able to find those bounce things a lot faster. You're going to be able to play more things out and then get a little bit more value with this time big enough, so on. And just as I was like looking up a deck list to kind of reference and everything like that, I refreshed it, and we actually got some of the results from the Standard Challenge 32 on the 3rd, and there was 5 copies in the top 16, with 2 being in the top 4.
So I will also say that when we talked about this with we were talking about in our pregame or our pre-show. I don't know why you at me like I know words. I told you English is definitely my 4th language at best. I will say I think the biggest thing this deck has going for it right now is there's so many people playing it. And I made the comparison, like if everyone just started playing Splinter Twin in Modern, it's going to show up as a big deck and part of the format, because eventually if enough people are playing the deck, it's going to start it's going to start getting 5-0s. It's going to start doing well in challenges. And this is a new hotness right now to play. Like, this is a shiny new toy. No one's really been playing with it. The deck isn't figured out yet. People are still trying to figure it out. All those type of things. Like, even so, like I just updated our list to the deck that got 2nd place today, and it's playing Mockingbird in it, which Claudio wasn't playing. It's not playing the 3-mana card that Claudio was playing. It's playing 2 Kaidos now. So like, and it was running 2 Shelter by Ghost in the main that Claudio wasn't doing. Just different things already. Like this deck is already like 7 cards different than what we just saw that got 1st place, and it got 2nd place. So clearly it wasn't like, oh, it did bad. It got 2nd place. But I do think that we have just an overwhelming amount of people playing this deck, and it doesn't necessarily make it the best deck to play.
Crazy thing is, too, looking at their metagame breakdown, it's the last thing I'll talk about it, I swear. It was the most played deck in that tournament with 6 copies in the Standard Challenge 32. So, like, the fact that, like, 5, I mean, really, like, the worst place was 20th in this deck, and then, like I said, 5 in the top 16. Like, this looks like a well-oiled machine. But I think you're probably right. This deck is going to be showing out at the Spotlight Series more than likely. It's a cheap deck. It seems like it's very good. Obviously, I think in a meta where we know that Dimir midrange is going to be the test if a deck is viable or not, that who knows? I mean, it could surprise us. Like I wouldn't be surprised if this deck like ended up being bad because people are starting to cram a lot of sideboard cards for it somewhere. But it also wouldn't surprise me if we saw at least one of these decks in the top 8, and if it was like in the top 3 of the of metagame share for this event, whenever we get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say like this deck is relatively cheap. Like when we look at like Claudio's version of the deck was $158 to build. That is ridiculously cheap, and if you like, especially like most of that money is in lands. It's just lands and the Storm Chaser talent. So if you already own Storm Chaser talent, that's like $50 gone that you don't have to pay for. None of the creatures are expensive in the deck, or anything like that. I got really confused because one of the lists I was looking at was $400. I'm like, why is this?
Yep.
Why is this deck so expensive? They had 3 soldiers in the sideboard, just casually $250 just casually sitting in the sideboard.
I was just about to say something about it because I was like, there's just a huge jump, and that's where I found it.
Yeah, I was like, what is this jump for? And I'm like, But like, yeah, I think that like I said, I think that the deck is not bad. I don't think it's a bad deck by any means. I don't think you're gonna get laughed out of the tournament for playing it, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it is overrepresented right now to the fact that like everyone's playing this. Like, yes, there's only 6 people playing it in the last challenge, and it did get or I guess there's 6 people who got into the top 32 with it, I should say, because they don't count everybody who's played, they just count the top 32 breakdown.
Yeah.
But I do think that it is overrepresented as it stands right now. And I think that this weekend is either going to be one of two things. It's going to showcase that Esper is the best deck in the format, and I say that jokingly, where I think it's a very well-positioned deck, or that it is not nearly as well-positioned as people think it is once they start playing against confident people. Because I will make an argument that I think that the people you like, especially because like on Magic Online, people love to run things up the ladder, and I think that your average like ladder player is not as good as your average grinder you're going to run into at a big tournament.
Fair's fair, I suppose.
So, but I'm curious to see what happens. I do think this is just going to be a deck that has a bad conversion rate because of how it mulligans. And I think that it's kind of the same concept of a lot of other decks where like if you run hot, the deck is perfect, but you can say that about a lot of decks in this format. And where if you have to, mulligan to 6, mulligan to 5 cards, the deck becomes a lot more unplayable as to where like if you mulligan to 5 with Golgari, you still can have a very keepable hand of like 3 lands, a removal spell, and a value creature, and you can just get there off of that. Not off of that alone, but that was going to buy you enough time to where you can draw out of this. Same thing with Dimir, even in the worst case, like if it's mulligan to 5 and you keep, even if you keep 3 lands, a 2-drop, and Kaido, you can easily draw out of your terrible 5 card mulligan. You have 5 cards with this, it looks a lot worse. And so I think that is the biggest problem I have with this is that when you get to talk about mulligans, this deck just doesn't survive the test of mulliganing. Now, maybe you don't ever have to mulligan with this deck because all your hands are like god hands, or you have keepable 6 and 7s all weekend. Then you don't have to worry about that problem. But variance is a thing of Magic that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, I think a lot of like what this deck, and this will be like the final thing I say about it. I think this deck is, the spells that it wants to play are super cheap. A lot of them are 1 to 2 mana. So I think at least if you can get like a 1 or 2 lander and you have like all 3 colors in your hand, if you have something like an Audakar Waste and a Darkslick Shores or some combination of those cards, I think you might be okay. I think just from how much value you can generate from picking up your things, you could probably survive until you hit land 3 and 4, and then that's I think where you can start getting a little crazy, being able to kind of run up your Storm Chaser's talent, pick things back up, or which really, funny enough, only gets This Town Ain't Big Enough, I believe, because it's sorcery. That's just crazy. Like, this card is just so good at just making a 1/1 otter that you don't even care about leveling it up to that point. You're just playing it because it makes a 1/1.
Yeah, it is almost a little unrealistic on how well these talents have actually done. With obviously like the red talent has been good in like Modern and Pioneer with their respective decks, and we had the green talent and the blue talent being green, white, and blue being played in Standard, and then the black talent gets played in Pioneer. Like all these talents have found homes, which is not to like pat Watsy on the back a little too much, but like that is very impressive that like they made like this little cycle when like all these cards have found homes. It's a little unrare or unrealistic to see happen a lot of times.
Oh yeah, but
So I do think that's kind of cool.
there'll be one more deck that we talk about. Of course, it's the deck that I absolutely love playing. It's the one that I choose to play in standard currently, because I think it helps you against kind of the problem of running against these aggro decks and these mid-range decks, and that's Jeskai Convoke. So I think what maybe the Esper Self Bounce deck does very well, a lot of these Dimir midrange, Golgari midrange, kind of relying on their removal to kind of press their advantage in a way. Of course, we talked about Dimir, being able to do it in a different way that Golgari is. But with like Jeskai Convoke, you are able to kind of play around the removal, because even if your opponent has, cut down and annoy with affliction and go for the throat, things like that, you're able to play these creatures, these 1-mana 1/2s, the 1-mana 1/1s that are making clues and map tokens, and then that's not something that's really attractive to blow up. And then you're using Gleeful Demolition. You're making a bunch of 1/1s. It's like still not really an attractive idea. Oh, guess what? Here's a Night Air and a Vios on turn 2. Like, all right, well, I guess I'll go for the throat that. Awesome. Like, I'm going to end up drawing 2 cards off of this. And then out of nowhere, I'm going to be able to play, a Imidane's Recruiter, or play something like a Case of the Gateway Express to remove your creature off the battlefield, get in for some damage, and then buff my creatures, and just from there make it very hard for your opponent and put a lot of tax on their individual cards, because a lot of what Dimir decks or the mid-range decks do is they try to 1/1 you a lot, and this is a deck that really plays around those 1/1s, because you're going to get a lot of value from your cards, or just get so many objects onto the battlefield to where your opponent's 1/1 again is blanked in kind of that respect. So it was a deck that I said was a dark horse coming into the standard season, and kind of as the season has wore on, it seems like we've been kind of correct that Jeskai has been kind of a pretty good go-to answer for these mid-range and some of these aggro decks as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is well positioned in the sense of like against most of the decks, especially game one, they don't have an answer to a go wide strategy, and like the fact that you can put on so much pressure so fast is a little crazy as a whole for them to deal with and like kind of interact with as a whole. After the sideboarding, Golgari and Dimir both get like board wipes that they can play, like the Gix command. That was way too challenging to say, but it's still a 5-mana board wipe. If you attack for 12-15 on turn 3, they still have to like kind of take that on the chin. Okay, now let's say they blocked, killed something. They're still not in great position. Like this is still, or not turn 3, turn 4, like, and then they had like the turn 5 board wipe. It's still not like amazing position. You just took 12 damage on the chin. You have to now worry about them rebuilding, and if they like, it is annoying for that to deal with. So it's not too surprising to see this kind of deck do well. I think that depending on how big Jeskai aggro is, or Jeskai Convoke is, will depend on how well the Esper Self Mill does, or oh my god, Esper Self Bounce. Jesus, words are hard today. Because Esper can't beat Convoke. Like, realistically, if you want to take God Hand versus God Hand, I'll take Jeskai all day.
I take Jeskai against most of probably all the decks in the format. If it came down to like whose nut draws better, I think Jeskai has such a high ceiling, and I mean, just from playing the deck one weekend, and I talked to you about it a little bit. I mean, I won 2 games over the weekend, or over that weekend, where I mulliganed to 5 with Jeskai Convoke.
Yeah,
I've like literally, I've played games where I turn 2 had 6 creatures in play with an Imidane's Recruiter on standby, for the next turn to essentially deal like 18 or some ridiculous amount of damage to my opponent, like on the next turn. This is a deck that does mulligan surprisingly well. It's a deck that you obviously want a ton of resources, but it's a deck that mulligans very well. It's a deck that can get to the board very, very quickly. It's oddly resilient to like mass, board wipes and things like that. Even if your opponent plays like the 3-mana ones, you can easily race a 5-mana Gix Command. But even if you get Gix Commanded, it's not necessarily the end of the world. It's not the end of the world if you get board wiped on turn 3 either.
Yeah. Especially if you know what you're doing, you know how to play. Like you can still do what you need to do. I do think that, moving forward, I think this weekend might be an actual good weekend for Jeskai Convoke. I think so in the same comparison where I said Esper Self Bounce is going to have a high number of people playing it and a low conversion rate into day 2, I think Jeskai Convoke is going to have a low to medium number of people playing it, but have a better conversion rate into day 2. Just because I think it's such a well-positioned deck in that sense, where you're able to just do well with it. I don't know how you're able just to overwhelm people. Like you only have essentially 2 creatures you care about dying. And that is your Knight Errant and your Warden of the Inner Skies. Warden because it gives you continuous value with being able to scry and essentially stack the top of your deck. And Knight Errant because it's a 4/4 body. It's just hard for people to deal with. But if they kill your Knight Errant, it's okay because you already got value off of it. Like the only thing that sucks is when someone goes like turn 1, cut down your Warden of the Skies. That's your feel bad moment. Because, any other creature they kill, you don't care about. It is a 1/1 that did something when it came into play, or already got you value. Even, Imidane's Recruiter, as long as it hit the board, you don't really care that it died. Oh no, you killed my 3/2. By the way, here's 10 the other ones coming at you. Shucks. So it's just you don't care about any of these creatures essentially dying, besides, Warden's the only one that can die without giving you any value. But... oh no, they killed my 1/2. Here's my other 5-drop, or my other 5 1/1s I put onto the field, still attacking for 5. Hitting people for 4 damage a turn is still good. So I do think that this deck is going to have a better time, I think, than Esper will in this weekend.
Yeah, I think just the fact that it's a deck that I'll say it's a little bit worse just because it's been around for a hot minute. I think people have, we've seen people shift away from stuff like Temporary Lockdown, which is crazy to me, and they're playing Split Up, and that's something that I ran into quite a bit when I played. You can easily play around it, and the fact that the version I picked up now also plays Split Up in the sideboard when you're playing, Knight Errant of Eos, and you're also playing the Warden of the Inner Sky. You can kind of play around your own. You can play around your own Split Up and things, which is pretty cool. But there's some innovations that the deck's made, and I think the philosophy and that people have kind of picked up with the deck. I think that it's, even though I think it's a known thing and people are going to be prepared for it anyway, your deck that's very good in game 1s, you're able to, again, blank a lot of the 1-for-1 removal. In the sideboarded games as well, you're able to get in enough damage pretty early on. You can play from, play over the top of the board wipes, and even if you get board wiped, you usually have 1 or 2 4/4 sticking around, and then you slam another Imidane's Recruiter, and you just kind of tell your opponent, figure out how to deal with this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna attack you for 13. You're at 5. What are you gonna do?
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely think this is a deck that we're gonna see do well as a whole this weekend. Like I said, as much as I said that Esper is going to have a terrible conversion rate, I think Jeskai is going to have an amazing conversion rate, or a respectable conversion rate as a whole. I in the sense of, I think that if 25 people still with Jeskai Convoke, I think that probably 10 plus are making it to day 2. I think it's just that well positioned as a whole, and people know about this deck, and it still doesn't matter because it's one of those decks where yes, it sees play, but it doesn't see enough play to really warrant playing a bunch of sideboard cards for it, or having an overall game plan for it that doesn't also work against another deck. And I think that when we look at, Esper Self Bounce as being like one of the most played decks moving forward, has a terrible matchup against Jeskai. It just it can't beat the nut draws, and it can't beat the average to good draws either, when they're just putting out so much pressure. Like, it's great that you got to bounce your thing and you ate my hand. Where like I took 7 damage or 8 damage, and you got rid of all my cards. And it's just like, oh, top deck's a recruiter. Like, it's the whole Thoughtseize problem, right? You can't Thoughtseize the top of the deck. You can't discard my top of the deck. Like, if I just make up a board state, and then you have, a couple 2/2s and a 2/3 in the play, and I'm attacking for 20, congratulations, you're not taking 20 this turn, but only 3 of my creatures are dying, and you're still taking a lot.
Yeah, and this is probably something where if I decide that I'm going to stream because I really want to like play it, show it off, whatever, there is a lot of the things, a lot of the different things you can take into account, like when playing against like Esper, playing against this the enchantments deck, playing against Dimir, these different mid-range decks, whatever, that can definitely give you some percentage points. But I think overall, like, whichever deck I think is going to be the most played deck, if we see a lot of the mid-range decks, then I would expect Jeskai aggro to perform very well, unless it just like runs really bad with the amount of people that register it versus like what matchups that actually gets to like play against. If we see a lot of the red aggro decks, then I would expect to see maybe mid-range perform a little bit better from the players that do register it. So it'll be kind of interesting. I'm totally looking forward to this event, period, because I think this is kind of what players have wanted, is like a Magic event that matters, that is going to have prizes, and I guess really just matters in terms of getting to the Pro Tour, because again, that's like essentially the second to last step of like the ultimate goal of being a competitive player.
Yeah. So I have one quick thing here so I have a hot take, if you will, what I think will be the maybe not best performing deck, but what deck I think is going to put up more numbers than people think is going to in the top 8 and top 32.
Okay.
I think Caretaker's Talent, the mono white token control, is going to be maybe like the actual dark horse of this tournament. The deck is good against the mid-range decks. It outvalues them to no degree. It plays removal. It plays not removal. It plays exile removal, so it gets rid of the Enduring Curiosity from Dimir. It almost always crushes the black-green decks running around, the Golgari decks. It gets to crush them pretty easily. I think that it can handle itself against the Esper Bounce relatively well. It has the early game like removal and things of that nature to slow down the Jeskai aggro deck enough to stabilize, and it can stabilize against the red aggressive decks as well. I think that as long as the Caretaker's deck can not stay in the draw bracket, it will do fine. I think that is the biggest problem with this deck, is it gets too many draws as a whole, because it is a slow, methodical deck. But I do think that it's going to be, as long as it doesn't draw its way to death, I think that it is going to put up more numbers than anyone expected in the top 16. Where I think we're going to see 1 to 2 of these in the top 8.
I can agree with that. I think that a lot of the problems that people end up getting into with the mono white deck, with going to turns and essentially timing out and not being able to close out a game, getting the draws, is just trying to play optimally at every turn of the game, when a lot of the time the mono white deck just has to find a way to put away the game. And I think instead of just like optimizing every single turn, like making the maximum amount of like 1/1 fish tokens, maybe treasure tokens, or like playing the right amount of spell, whatever. I think at a certain point, it's just like, I gotta go find my 7-mana Overlord. I gotta put this thing into play, and then I have enough spells to where I can just kind of like back it up and make sure it gets through. So I think if there's like a person that finds like the right time where it's like, I don't need to play optimally, I just need to see as many cards as possible, doing it as fast as I can, giving myself as much time to close out the game where I need to. And if there's someone that manages to do that, or can at least understand that, the right point to start doing that, we could probably see a mono white deck in the top 8, and I would not be surprised seeing at least one copy there.
Hmm. I do think it is a vastly underplayed deck for what it is right now. But that's kind of like my super hot take. Like I think that the Esper take is not nearly as hot as I want to make it out to be. But I think Caretaker's Talent is actually in a very well positioned right now, especially going into this weekend.
Yeah, mine's kind of boring. I think that Dimir mid range is still. I think it's going to be like the best deck going into it. I'm going to give it the LeBron James award, where it's like, he's 40 years old. He's been there for a while. There's no way he's still that good. And it's still just that good. It's a known commodity. People have known that this is like one of like the top 2 decks to play. And everyone's had a chance to kind of take a crack at it, and it's just slowly started to break away from the metagame. The Esper deck seems to have caught up to it, but Dimir's going to do what Dimir always does, and it's going to find a way to like crush that deck too, and just continue the supremacy of our Enduring Curiosity / Kaido Overlord.
Yeah.
So, boring take from me, but I think that it's probably an
accurate take.
Yeah, accurate. I think that Dimir is just going to continue to flex, if you will, as the kids say.
Yeah, I definitely see that Dimir are just doing well. Like I said, I don't think it's any craziness that they do well, but I do think that I think my takes are at least well mannered in the sense of like I do think the Esper deck is going to have a worse conversion rate than people think it's going to happen. I think that if we're looking at the metagame as a whole, it's probably going to be Dimir, Esper, or the red aggressive decks tied for second and third with Esper, and then probably rounding up with Golgari and Jeskai as like the 4th and 5th most played decks. And then of course we'll have a smattering of the other things. I'm sure we'll see the tempo based decks. We'll see the flood collar decks. We'll see mono white token control or caretakers control. We'll see all the other stuff that's running around. The little like odds and ends that people try to play. I'm sure someone will register Gruul Delirium. They will go 0-3 drop and have a sad day, but they will register it.
Yeah, I mean, you have like the various different like domain strategies where people are just doing like actual domain stuff. You have them playing like the 2-color domain because then they get to play the the good domain cards plus up the beanstalk. There's just, you're right, there's a bunch of other things that people could be playing that they're going to take just because that's what they've been playing, that's what they have fun playing, whatever the case may be. Shoot, and we'll probably see a pretty high percentage of decks in the 1 and 2 spot, I would say, are going to be probably in that double digit. If there's like if there manages to be like 3 decks that have like a double digit, even if it's like 11%, 10.5, and then 10.3, I would be very shocked. I think that I would expect like 2 decks to have that like 10%, and then we'll drop down to like 5 or 6% for like third, yeah. And then all those decks will kind of be pretty close together in that bracket.
Yeah, I would agree with that, I think, as a whole. But hopefully this has helped you prepare for either playing the tournament. Obviously, if you're planning on playing the tournament, I assume you knew what was going on. You knew what decks to kind of look out for. The Esper deck obviously being the newest one to kind of break away from the format and kind of showcase of being a deck. Hopefully this helps you, though, as you're watching the event. Hopefully it gives you ideas of what to play in Standard and what to kind of look out for if you're going to be playing in any of your RCQs, anything like that, coming up here from now until March. That's kind of what we always hope. Our goal is to help people become more of a spike, as essentially, or someone who is able to take down a tournament, whether that be either your local FNM, your RCQ, your RC. He says hesitantly, anything like that. That is what we're here for, and hopefully, giving some fun jokes along the way.
Oh yeah, but I think that's. I don't think I have anything else I want to add. Is there anything else you want to add, Randy?
No, my Caretaker's Talent was the last thing I had to talk about.
Well, alrighty. I'm glad I hope you all enjoyed this episode of the Casual Spikes podcast. Of course, if you did enjoy at any point, or you want something to add, whatever the case may be, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell, all that fun stuff. Leave a like on the video, and of course, leave a comment down below what you think about the Spotlight series. If you're excited for it, if there's a deck that you think could potentially break out that's going to do better than maybe what some other people expect, we would love to hear those in the comments down below. Of course, asking any questions as well, and maybe we'll answer them on the show. More than likely we will, because we've only gotten like 1 or 2 questions ever.
Yes, we like engagement. We like hearing from you. 6 people who watch our show. We like hearing from you.
Yeah, like the engagement, obviously, it helps with the algorithm and everything. It gets the videos out there to other people, so we do greatly appreciate that. And of course, if you want more content from myself or Randy, both of our channels are linked in the description down below if you want more of that Modern, Pioneer, and standard content as well. So, again, we do greatly appreciate any and all support.
Yes,
that's going to do it for us here on the Casual Spikes here. Next week, I would imagine that we'll probably go over some of the results for that tournament and start talking about Modern and looking into what we could expect from some of the February RCs that are going to be taking place.
Yeah. Next week we'll be talking about what happened this weekend and kind of getting prepped for what's going to happen on the European RC.
So hope you enjoyed the episode, and hope to catch you all next week when we talk about all that fun stuff.
Yes.
Bye.